You're in the wrong section, sir. The words sliced through the cabin louder than the engine hum, louder even than the silence that followed. It wasn't the sentence itself that held power, it was the way it was delivered. Flat, firm, devoid of question or apology. The woman's tone dripped with quiet certainty, like she'd seen this mistake before, like he couldn't possibly belong here. Isaiah Freeman didn't flinch. He stood perfectly still, the polished leather of his dress shoes planted just beyond the cream seam dividing the cabin's plush carpet. His hand remained steady on the overhead bin, his Air Force cap tucked neatly under his arm. Outside, on the tarmac of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, the summer sun glazed the wing of the jet in molten gold. Inside, the air was chilled, tight with tension. He exhaled through his nose, fingers brushing the front of his uniform, where a faint trace of red clay still clung to the dark fabric, a quiet, dusty reminder of the graveyard in Birmingham, where 2 days earlier he had buried his mother beneath a canopy of magnolia trees. He hadn't cried, not when they lowered her casket, not when the honor guard fired their salute, not even when his father, Colonel Charles Freeman, stood stone-faced in full-dress blues and whispered, "She raised you to carry this." What he had carried since then was heavier than grief. It was duty. It was memory. It was the burden of still needing to wear the uniform for people to believe he deserved a seat like this. "I said," the flight attendant repeated, "you're in the wrong section." Isaiah turned slightly. Her name tag read, Holly Reeves. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a tight bun, so severe it looked like it hurt. Her lips were painted a color he couldn't name. Cold and clinical like her smile wasn't meant to reach anyone. "I'm not," he said simply, and held out his boarding pass. She took it with practiced precision, scanning it as if daring the paper to contradict him. "Seat 2A, she read aloud. Her eyes darted up to him again. I see." He didn't respond. "There's limited space in these bins," she added, as if reading from a manual. "You'll need to check your bag." "This duffel contains equipment and documents I'm not authorized to check," Isaiah said, tone even, voice low. "Military protocols prohibit it." Her smile thinned. "The bin is for everyone, not just you." Isaiah glanced around. Across the aisle, a white man in a pressed polo shirt had already stashed 2 large carry-ons in the overhead without a second glance from anyone. The bin above Isaiah was still nearly empty. He tried again. "Then may I speak to the lead flight attendant or the captain?" "The captain is preparing for takeoff," Holly snapped, "and I'm handling this section." Her voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp, and already passengers were glancing up from their phones and magazines. He saw a woman 2 rows back frown slightly. A businessman near the window shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Before Isaiah could respond, another flight attendant approached. Younger. Black. Her name tag read Jasmine Cole. "Everything all right?" Jasmine asked, her voice soft but curious. Holly didn't turn. "Just a bag issue. This passenger is taking up too much space." Jasmine looked at Isaiah's uniform, then at the single duffel still in his hand. "I believe we have space in the crew closet for military bags," Jasmine offered, and gave Isaiah a subtle nod. Holly hesitated. Then, tightly, "Fine, but next time check it like everyone else." Isaiah said nothing. He handed the bag to Jasmine with a quiet thank you and sat down in his seat. The cushion was soft. Too soft. His back stayed straight. A man across the aisle, a former soldier, judging by his bearing, leaned slightly toward Isaiah and murmured, "Never seen them check overhead space in first class before?" Isaiah gave a single nod. He knew. The engines began their low rumble, and the plane edged away from the gate. The flight to Washington, D.C. would take just under 2 hours. He had a classified Pentagon briefing at 0800 tomorrow. A new protocol being reviewed by the Joint Aviation Security Task Force, his task force. But he was already on assignment. What Holly didn't know, what no one aboard this aircraft knew yet, was that Isaiah Freeman wasn't just a grieving son on his way home. He was there to watch them, evaluate, report. And now, Holly Reeves was in the report. As the plane rolled down the taxiway, she passed his seat again and, without looking, muttered just loud enough for him to hear. Always some people needing special treatment. Isaiah's fingers curled on the armrest. He did not respond. The seat beside him remained empty. That suited him fine. He didn't feel like talking. Not after the past week. Not after standing in the church where his mother had sung in the choir for 35 years. Not after laying her to rest beside the grandfather who had flown reconnaissance over North Africa in a segregated squadron and had come home to be told he couldn't eat in the front half of a diner. He reached into his coat pocket and touched the edge of the cloth that wrapped his mother's worn Bible. The same cloth she had carried during the 1963 Birmingham campaign. The stitching had started to unravel, but he hadn't had the heart to fix it. It held its power in the fray. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard. We're currently third in line for takeoff. Weather in Washington is clear. Estimated flight time, 1 hour and 47 minutes. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the flight." Relax. The plane surged forward, the nose lifting skyward. Isaiah closed his eyes for just a moment, remembering the church organ, the sweet weight of magnolia blossoms, the warm, worn hand of his father gripping his shoulder. You were raised to carry this. The plane climbed, the city falling away below. The sound of engines was steady now. Inside the cabin, the drinks cart began to rattle down the aisle. Holly Reeves was back in motion, smile affixed to her face like a plastic badge. She poured scotch for the man in 2B, water for the couple in 3A and 3B. She paused beside Isaiah's seat, but didn't look at him. Didn't ask. Just moved on. Isaiah opened his eyes. Said nothing. The man across the aisle, silver hair, thick wrists, military ring, watched, didn't speak. Didn't. Neither did Jasmine Cole, who appeared again near the galley, her expression unreadable. She glanced at Isaiah and then turned away. Not yet. Isaiah shifted in his seat, the tension settling into his chest like an old bruise resurfacing. The kind of ache you don't speak of. The kind that hums just beneath the surface, reminding you that you've been here before. He wasn't surprised, just tired. The drink cart continued. The service passed. The insult stayed. He reached down, adjusting the crease in his slacks, and stared straight ahead. Danielle Monroe, seated 3 rows back, closed her book Invisible Man and looked forward with narrowed eyes. Isaiah didn't see her yet, but soon she'd be the only voice that mattered. The cabin returned to quiet. The air was still. Outside, the sun was starting to sink. Inside, something else had begun to rise. The seatbelt sign dinged off. And Holly Reeves passed by Isaiah one more time, this time not speaking, not even pretending. It had started, and it wasn't finished. As the door shut and the plane pushed back from the gate, Holly passed by Isaiah's seat without a glance and whispered just loud enough. Always some people needing special treatment. The ice cubes clinked in every glass but his. Isaiah Freeman sat upright in 2A, spine like a ruler, shoulders squared as if still under inspection. The quiet chill of the cabin had settled into something colder, a deliberate exclusion dressed as routine. The tray table in front of him remained empty, though others were now occupied with ginger ale, bourbon, tomato juice, and ice. The absence on his tray wasn't an oversight. It was the message. He looked across the aisle where the man in 2B sipped a second scotch, his short-sleeved dress shirt barely wrinkled despite the cramped quarters. He glanced at Isaiah, hesitated, then offered a tight, uncomfortable smile. Isaiah nodded politely, but did not return it. He had no more patience for niceties that arrived too late. His mother once told him, "They won't always shout their hatred. Sometimes they just forget to serve you." He hadn't understood it then. Now it rang in his mind like gospel. He had boarded this flight from Atlanta to Washington, D.C. to do an official assessment, a covert one, involving the behavior of airline staff toward passengers in uniform. What he hadn't expected was how deeply personal the job would feel. Not after a funeral. Not after burying the only woman who never asked him to prove his worth. This chapter of his journey was meant to be quiet, observe, report, document. Instead, it was quickly becoming a lesson in restraint. And in humiliation. Hartsfield-Jackson's departure had been smooth, the sun warm across the wings, the clouds parting like curtains. Now, high above the Virginia landscape, the sky glowed with early evening pink, yet the inside of the aircraft remained a cold theater of civility stretched thin. Holly Reeves had completed beverage service in first class with surgical precision, attending to every passenger except him. No accident, no forgetfulness, intentional neglect. Isaiah had waited patiently, politely, until the tray cart passed. "Excuse me," he said quietly, lifting a hand. No response. He tried again, a bit louder, measured. "Ma'am, may I have some water, please?" Holly paused, one row down. She turned slowly, meeting his gaze with that same hollow civility. "I'll be with you once I've completed the other passengers," she said in a voice that smiled but didn't mean it. He lowered his hand. "Thank you." Behind him, a woman's voice spoke. "Miss, could we get some service here?" It was calm, clipped, unmistakably firm. The businessman in 2B had set down his glass. Holly turned with the smoothness of trained hospitality. "Of course, sir. What can I get you?" "I'd like another scotch," he said. "And I believe this gentleman has been trying to get your attention for some water." Her smile dimmed, not disappearing, just shriveling around the corners. "I'll be right with him after I finish serving the other passengers," she said, then rolled the cart down without waiting for a reply. Isaiah said nothing. Danielle Monroe, seated diagonally behind him in 3A, had been watching for some time. Her hands, elegant and still, rested on her closed notebook. The cover was embossed with Equal Liberty, a civil rights symposium title from the Atlanta conference she had just left. She unbuckled her seatbelt, leaned forward, and tapped lightly on his shoulder. "I have an extra," she said, extending a sealed bottle of water. "Please take mine." Isaiah turned, momentarily surprised by her voice. Her eyes were dark and direct. He noted the N8ACP pin on her lapel, worn like it had purpose. "I appreciate that," he said, "but I wouldn't want to leave you without." She smiled. "I'm not thirsty. Take it." He accepted the bottle, nodding again. Isaiah Freeman. "Danielle Monroe, civil rights attorney. I just spent 2 days listening to panels about things like this." She paused. "And now I'm watching it happen, seat by seat." Her voice was calm but sharp. It didn't waver. Isaiah unscrewed the cap, took a sip. "Unfortunately, it's not surprising." "Doesn't make it right," she said. They spoke softly, the hum of the engines their only cover. Their conversation drifted from her work with the American Civil Liberties Union to a case she had just filed in Chicago involving a rideshare company and discriminatory drop-off practices. Isaiah nodded as she spoke, grounding himself in her clarity. 15 years in, he said finally. Air Force, currently stationed at the Pentagon. She tilted her head. That explains the uniform. But not the silence. You could have raised your voice back there. He looked out the window for a moment before answering. My father told me once, they're waiting for you to lose your temper, so never let them write your reaction before you act. Danielle folded her arms. And how's that worked for you? Isaiah exhaled. I'm still here. The stewardess's voice cut through their conversation like a knife. Sir, Holly said, reappearing, I'm going to have to ask you to keep your voice down. You're disturbing other passengers. Isaiah blinked. The cabin was filled with low murmurs and clinking glasses. His conversation with Danielle had been quieter than the woman in 1C, giving a play-by-play of her daughter's wedding. We were just talking, Danielle interjected, at a normal volume. Holly didn't acknowledge her. If you continue to be disruptive, I'll have to report you to the captain. Isaiah's jaw tightened. Ma'am, I am not being disruptive. I've spoken quietly and respectfully. That's your opinion, she replied, her voice rising. I determine what constitutes disruptive behavior on this aircraft. Danielle's expression sharpened. Are you serious? Holly turned her attention elsewhere, walking off as if her point had been proven by her exit. The man across the aisle muttered under his breath. Unreal. Jasmine Cole passed with a trash bag. She caught Isaiah's eyes for a brief second. Her mouth parted slightly, but she kept moving. Too many ears. Too much at stake. Isaiah looked forward, jaw clenched. The wound from earlier stung less than the quiet effort to humiliate him under the pretense of procedure. The attack wasn't loud. It was strategic. He thought back to being 10 years old, flying with his father in civilian clothes, hearing a white attendant question his dad's ticket. Why does she treat you like that? He'd asked back then. Because some people will always see our skin before they see our humanity, his father had said. But we don't stop flying. We just learn to fly higher than their prejudice. Danielle rested a hand briefly on Isaiah's tray. You're handling this with more grace than I would. Isaiah gave her a half smile. Grace is a habit in this line of work. Her face softened. It shouldn't have to be. He wanted to tell her how exhausting it was, this constant need to be still, be polite, be better, how the burden never lessened, only deepened over time. He wanted to say he was tired. That today, with his mother's funeral still wrapped around him like the smell of magnolia and clay, the effort felt heavier than usual. But he didn't say any of that. He straightened his back and said, It comes with the job. 30 minutes later, turbulence shook the cabin. A gentle lurch first, then a more violent dip. Gasps fluttered from several seats. The overhead bins trembled. The pilot came over the speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. We've hit some unexpected turbulence. Jasmine's voice followed on the intercom. Remember to secure your own mask before assisting others. Then, with a hiss, the oxygen masks dropped. The cabin filled with motion. Unpracticed hands reached, fumbled, failed. Isaiah had already secured his mask. He turned and saw the elderly man in 1D white hair, trembling fingers struggling to fasten his. Isaiah unbuckled, reached forward. Let me help you, sir. The man nodded, grateful. Isaiah fit the mask around his face gently, adjusting the elastic, tightening it properly. Thank you, son, the man mumbled behind the plastic. These old hands, they don't work like they used to. No trouble at all, Isaiah replied, checking the straps once more. And then, what do you think you're doing? Holly's voice cracked like a whip. She was stumbling slightly from the turbulence, but her anger was clear. Her eyes blazed. I was helping this gentleman with his oxygen mask, Isaiah said. You are interfering with safety protocols, she barked. Passengers are not authorized to assist. That is crew responsibility. Isaiah kept his voice level. He needed immediate help. I have emergency training through the military. I don't care if you're the Secretary of Defense, she snapped. You don't get to do whatever you want. Sit down, now! I am in my seat, Isaiah said quietly. The elderly man tried to speak. He was just helping me. Sir, stay out of this, Holly cut him off. Other passengers had turned around now. Eyes watched, phones tilted up. Isaiah took a deep breath. I apologize if I overstepped, but I was only trying to help. Her lip curled. Your help could endanger everyone on this flight. This isn't a military aircraft. Then she leaned closer, voice nearly a hiss. And I'm not afraid of your little act. Isaiah stared at her, feeling something shift deep inside. The man across the aisle whispered, Jesus Christ. Danielle stood up. That's enough. But Holly ignored her. Who do you think you are? Walking in here like you own the place? Isaiah didn't move. May I have your name, please? What? She spat. I'd like to file a formal complaint regarding your conduct. She drew back slightly, then laughed a brittle, hollow sound. Are you threatening me? No, ma'am. I'm exercising my right as a passenger. Her eyes narrowed. Unbelievable. You're the one causing problems. Is that even a real uniform? Or did you buy it online to get special treatment? Gasps. The man in 2B stood halfway. That's out of line. Isaiah reached into his coat pocket. This, he said, unfolding a small wallet of credentials, is my Department of Defense ID. And I am Major Isaiah Freeman, United States Air Force. Holly's face drained of color. And this uniform represents 15 years of service, including combat, including sacrifice. She froze. For half a second, it seemed she might retreat. Then her hand moved and struck his face. The slap echoed like a crack across the cabin. Isaiah didn't flinch. Danielle had her phone out. I have it all on video. Holly stepped back, panting, eyes wide. Jasmine rushed forward. Passengers shouted. Phones were raised. The elderly man reached for Isaiah's arm. And Isaiah stood slowly, quietly. He opened his coat, removed a small leather case, and turned to Jasmine. I need to speak with the captain. Immediately. The sound didn't come from the engines or the turbulence. It came from her hand hitting his cheek. For a moment, the entire cabin paused in suspended disbelief. It was as if time had caught its breath. The slap had echoed like a shot across water, sharp and chilling. Then came the stunned silence, the kind that follows something sacred being broken in plain view. Isaiah Freeman didn't move. The sting bloomed slowly on his face, heat rising from skin to soul, but his spine stayed straight. His hands remained open. His voice, when it came, was measured. I did not threaten you, he said, eyes locked on Holly Reeves. The elderly man beside him, Walter Dunhill, rested a trembling hand on Isaiah's arm. The man's face was pale with horror. That wasn't right, he whispered. Across the aisle, the businessman in 2B rose fully to his feet now. Enough, he said. That was assault. Danielle Monroe didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her phone was already recording, her hands steady, her face calm and lit with purpose. It's all on video, she said. Every second of it. Other passengers followed. Phones lifted like shields. Witnesses documenting what their voices might once have been too afraid to say aloud. Jasmine Cole stood frozen in the aisle for a beat too long. Then, propelled by shock and duty, she stepped forward between Isaiah and Holly. Amber? Jasmine said, her voice lower now, the real name trembling on her tongue. What have you done? Holly looked around. Eyes. Cameras. Truth catching up. The authority she once held in posture and tone dissolved into chaos. Her lips parted as if to explain, to grasp for something, anything that would return the power. He was threatening me, she said, but the words dropped like stones into water. Not a single passenger echoed her claim. Not a single voice rose in her defense. Isaiah slowly reached into his breast pocket. The leather case opened with a soft click, revealing credentials that glinted under the overhead light. "Major Isaiah Freeman," he said, "United States Air Force, Federal Aviation Administration Inspector, active duty, special assignment." Jasmine's breath caught. Danielle's eyes widened. She stepped closer now, her lawyer's instinct pushing through. "He's not just a passenger," she said. "He's a federal officer, and you just committed battery." Holly took a step back. "No, this is a setup," she said. He provoked me. He was raising his voice, intimidating me in front of everyone." Danielle kept recording. "And yet you struck him." Walter Dunhill lifted his chin. "I saw the whole thing. He never raised his voice. Never once." Another voice came from row 4. "She ignored him the whole flight, then she slapped him." Then more. One after another, a ripple of resistance, not shouted but firm, unequivocal. "He did nothing wrong. She was targeting him. I've got it recorded too." Holly's hands trembled now, clutching the fabric of her skirt. Her skin flushed red as realization set in. The aircraft was no longer her space to command. It belonged to the eyes that had seen too much, and the phones that now held her actions in high definition. Jasmine stepped in closer. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "You need to go to the back galley, now." Holly opened her mouth to protest. "Now," Jasmine repeated, louder. Something in Jasmine's tone, or perhaps the full unraveling of Holly's facade, made her obey. She turned and walked down the aisle, her posture shrinking with each step. The walk of someone no longer in uniform, only in disgrace. Isaiah remained seated, hands still folded on his lap. The pain on his cheek had dulled to a steady heat, but the ache in his chest lingered. This wasn't just about the slap. It was about what it meant. That even dressed in the flag, he could still be marked as suspect. Danielle placed a hand gently on his tray table. "I'm gathering witness statements," she said. "You're going to have support." He looked up at her, grateful. "Thank you." Walter cleared his throat beside him. "My son served in Desert Storm," he said. "Men like you make this country better. Don't let her make you question that." The words hit Isaiah harder than the slap had. He closed his eyes briefly, feeling the weight of decades settle on his shoulders. His father's lessons, his mother's voice, the silence of all the men before him who had endured with no cameras, no witnesses, no justice. When he opened his eyes, Jasmine had returned, standing slightly apart, hands clasped tightly in front of her. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I saw it starting. I should have spoken up earlier." Isaiah gave her a nod. "You did now. That matters." The businessman in 2B handed him a card. "Major Brad Thornton," he said. "Former Navy. I saw everything. I'll back you however you need." Danielle was already moving through the cabin, asking for names, numbers, and statements. Passengers handed over business cards, wrote notes on napkins, spoke quietly into her phone's recorder. What began as fear and tension was transforming into resolve. Isaiah leaned back in his seat, letting his hands rest loosely on his knees. The oxygen masks had been retracted, and the cabin lights dimmed. But nothing about the atmosphere was calm now. His phone buzzed softly in his pocket. He pulled it out. A secure message flashed across the screen. "Cascade protocol activated. Authorization required. Aviation breach verified." His heart skipped once. He tapped in his code. The message unfolded like a classified document laid bare. "Eyes only. Level Alpha clearance. Commence immediate action under Directive 7734. Federal Aviation Security breach confirmed. Field response authorized." The room around him fell away. The slap wasn't just personal now. It was operational. It was official. The mask of silence he had worn since stepping on the plane dropped quietly. This was no longer just a matter of dignity. It was a matter of duty. He tucked his phone away and looked ahead, the decision forming already. He had never used the authority he carried. It was meant for emergencies, failures of security, failures of professionalism that risked lives. But if a crew member could assault a uniformed officer in plain view of civilians, what did that say about the structural rot inside the airline? What danger would that pose in a real emergency? Justice had never been his assignment. Until now. Isaiah rose from his seat once more, the leather case in hand. The cabin quieted as he stepped into the aisle. His stride was calm, not hurried. Not angry. The kind of calm born of training. The kind that made people nervous even when no voice was raised. He passed Jasmine, who turned and followed without needing to ask why. Passengers watched. Some whispered. At the cockpit door, Isaiah tapped Jasmine lightly on the arm. "Please notify the captain. Tell him I need to speak to him immediately. It concerns federal aviation security." Her eyes widened, but she didn't hesitate. She walked to the door, performed the knock sequence. Inside, metal clicked. The door opened a sliver. A wary co-pilot peeked out. Jasmine spoke calmly, clearly. "It's official business. He needs to speak with the captain now." Isaiah stepped forward, his voice low and formal. "Major Isaiah Freeman, United States Air Force, Joint Aviation Security Task Force, Level Alpha clearance, immediate access required." The co-pilot blinked, taking in the credentials, the rank, the tone. The door opened fully. Captain Ray Donovan turned from his instruments. He looked tired, focused, irritated by the intrusion. "This better be important. We're managing weather traffic." Isaiah handed him the case. "This is no longer a routine flight." Captain Donovan opened it. Read. Then looked back up slowly, face paling. "What happened?" Isaiah replied evenly. "One of your flight attendants just physically assaulted a federal inspector mid-flight. There are witnesses, recordings. Prior to that, she demonstrated a pattern of racial discrimination and failed protocol enforcement. She's compromised the integrity of this flight." The co-pilot swore under his breath. Captain Donovan swallowed hard. "We're 90 miles from Charlotte." "I'm formally invoking the Cascade Protocol," Isaiah said. "This flight is grounded upon arrival. You'll begin diversion procedures now." The captain stared at him. "You're serious?" Isaiah looked him square in the eye. "I'm deadly serious." Captain Donovan's fingers hovered above the radio dial. "Understood." The cockpit door began to close again, and from down the aisle, a familiar voice rose behind them. "What is he doing in the cockpit?" Holly Reeves appeared, red-faced, wild-eyed, disbelief written across every twitch of her features. Her voice cracked against the reinforced doorframe. "This is a restricted area. He doesn't belong up there." Captain Donovan turned slowly. The steel in his voice returned. "Ms. Reeves, you're speaking to an FAA inspector operating under federal clearance." Her face contorted in disbelief. "That's not real. He's just a passenger trying to intimidate me. You're going to take his side?" Captain Donovan rose from his seat. "Ms. Reeves, you are relieved of duty, effective immediately. Go to the crew rest area. Do not speak again." She stepped forward. "You can't do this. He assaulted me with his presence." The captain cut her off. "One more word, and you'll be removed from the aircraft by federal agents the moment we land." The silence returned, except for the steady click of the course adjustment on the cockpit panel. The aircraft banked slightly, and the city of Charlotte appeared on the horizon. Isaiah's eyes stayed forward. The mission had changed, and the reckoning had begun. He opened his phone and entered the next command. Cascade protocol confirmed. Grounding in progress. He tucked it away and returned to his seat. Danielle leaned in. What's happening? Isaiah didn't flinch. It's a security protocol. She stared at him, then slowly connected the dots. You're not just a regular officer, are you? Isaiah shook his head once. No. You're not just a passenger, but she slapped you like you were. The flight crew began quietly rearranging their positions. Holly was gone. Jasmine was now in charge of first class. The captain's voice came over the intercom. Due to an operational issue, we'll be making an unscheduled landing at Charlotte Douglas International Airport. We ask for your patience. We'll be on the ground shortly. The businessman in 2B turned to Isaiah, eyes wide. What the hell just happened? Isaiah didn't answer. He watched the skyline of Charlotte rise from the mist and whispered, to no one in particular, "They're about to find out." The second the wheels touched down, the silence inside the cabin deepened, not the usual landing hush of anticipation, but a heavy quiet, as if the very air knew something irreversible had just begun. Charlotte Douglas International Airport looked ordinary from the window. Runways shimmering in the afternoon light, service vehicles crawling like ants along concrete lines. But inside the plane, every passenger sensed the extraordinary. They weren't arriving at a destination. They were arriving at the consequences. Isaiah Freeman stayed seated, posture composed, eyes straight ahead. But his mind was preparing for what came next. The Cascade Protocol was no longer theoretical. It was in motion, and that meant consequences not just for Holly Reeves, but for the airline, the crew, and every executive who had ignored the quiet rot of systemic bias, festering behind smiles and scripted apologies. Jasmine Cole stood by the galley, headset off, hands folded. She hadn't said a word since the captain relieved Holly. Her eyes scanned the rows slowly, her expression unreadable, but her breath told a different story. Shallow, fast, bracing for fallout. Danielle Monroe leaned slightly toward Isaiah. "There's a line of squad cars waiting," she said, her voice low. "I saw them from the window. This isn't going to be quiet." Isaiah nodded. It was never going to be. The seatbelt sign blinked off, but no one moved. Captain Donovan stepped into the front of the cabin. His face was pale but steady. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "due to an active federal investigation involving our crew, we ask that all passengers remain seated. Law enforcement will enter shortly. We appreciate your cooperation." Before anyone could respond, the jet bridge connected with a jolt. The cabin door hissed open, and in walked Colonel Charles Freeman, Isaiah's father. Decorated veteran, civil rights strategist, member of the Airline Oversight Board. The man was dressed not in uniform, but in a tailored charcoal suit with a folded American flag pin at the lapel. His stride was slow, deliberate, and absolutely unmissable. Passengers turned, whispers flared. Isaiah stood quietly. Their eyes met. Nothing was said, but everything passed between them, years of lessons, losses, and the understanding that this moment wasn't just about this flight. It was about history. Behind Charles, 2 federal agents entered, followed by a woman in a dark skirt suit, an executive from the airline, judging by the badge clipped to her blazer. Jasmine's lips parted slightly when she recognized Charles. Danielle's hand tightened on her phone, now at her side, recording once again. "Major Freeman," the woman in the suit began, trying for warmth. "We want to assure you this is being handled with the utmost seriousness." Charles held up a hand. "I'm not here for statements. I'm here to observe." Her mouth snapped shut. Isaiah looked to the agents. "Yeah. She's in the aft galley. She struck a federal inspector in uniform. There are at least 15 recorded witness statements and video documentation. The agents moved without hesitation. Holly's voice rose before they reached her. "You're not taking me off this plane like some criminal. I did my job. I protected the cabin." The agents ignored her protests. They escorted her firmly down the aisle. Passengers didn't cheer. They didn't jeer. They watched, silent, steady, bearing witness. Danielle stood up and followed them out. She wasn't finished documenting. She wouldn't be for days. The woman in the skirt suit tried again. "Major, if we could speak privately." "I'll speak before the board," Isaiah said. "Not here, not with spin." The woman's cheeks flushed. Jasmine approached him carefully. Her voice was quiet. "Are you okay?" Isaiah turned toward her. The question hung heavier than she'd intended. "No," he answered simply. "But I'm standing." She gave the smallest nod, eyes brimming, then returned to her duties, now as acting laid. Colonel Freeman walked past Isaiah, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. "There's a room prepared for you." "I'd rather walk out with everyone else," Isaiah said. Charles hesitated. "It's going to be loud." Isaiah looked around the cabin. The passengers, black, white, young, old, still watched. "I think it needs to be." The two men walked together, row by row, aisle by aisle, under the low cabin lights and the hum of questions not yet asked. At the gate, the flash of cameras erupted like lightning. Reporters lined the barricades. Microphones thrust forward. Voices clamored. "Sir, were you assaulted by a flight attendant? Are you pressing charges? Is this the start of a federal audit?" Isaiah paused just past the threshold, the hum of the airport rushing in behind him. "I was assaulted," he said clearly, "not just by a person, but by a culture that allows certain people to be seen as threats before they ever speak. That culture exists inside this airline, and it stops today." The reporters shouted more questions. Security tried to control the scene. Charles guided Isaiah toward a private corridor. Just before turning the corner, Isaiah glanced back. Passengers from the flight were filing out now. Quiet. Proud. A few nodded to him. Some clapped once. Jasmine looked straight at him and gave a small, resolute salute. Back in the press room, the airline's legal team scrambled to draft statements. But the footage had already gone viral. Danielle's video had uploaded mid-flight thanks to the Wi-Fi. By the time they reached the debriefing room, the phrase, "the slap that grounded an airplane," was already trending across platforms. Charles closed the door behind them. "You changed the conversation today," he said. Isaiah sat heavily in the chair. "I didn't want to. I just wanted to get home." His father nodded. "That's the tragedy, son. You didn't want to make history, but it came for you anyway." A soft chime interrupted them. Isaiah's phone buzzed again. A message flashed. "Request. Congressional testimony. House Subcommittee on Transportation Oversight." Charles raised an eyebrow. "You ready for the next altitude?" Isaiah let the phone rest on the table. "I'll be there." And in a glass conference room overlooking the tarmac, where the plane still sat cooling in the sun, a father and son prepared for the storm that was coming. But Isaiah already knew. He wasn't flying blind anymore. He was flying with purpose. The first televised hearing began with a gavel and ended with a nation holding its breath. It was held in a chamber carved from history, dark wood panels, arched windows filtering sunlight, the seal of the United States embossed on every surface like a warning. Inside the House Subcommittee on Transportation Oversight, rows of suited officials lined the benches, their expressions ranging from bored to grim. Network cameras crouched like insects along the back wall. Live feeds rolled across news tickers nationwide. The country had seen the slap. Now, it wanted answers. Isaiah Freeman sat at the witness table, crisp in his Air Force dress blues. His chest bore no medals, he'd chosen it that way. This wasn't about valor. It was about voice. Representative Linda Parrish, a white woman in her 70s from North Carolina, leaned forward, her pearl necklace resting lightly on the microphone. "Major Freeman," she said, voice slow and precise, "can you walk us through what you believe triggered this incident aboard the aircraft?" Isaiah looked at her, then at the rows of faces before him. He could feel the weight of the room pressing inward, but his voice remained steady. It wasn't one incident, it was a pattern of perception. I was seen not as a passenger, not as a professional, but as a problem, before I said a word. A rustle moved through the chamber. No outrage, no shock, just quiet recognition. "And this wasn't the first time," Parrish added. "No, ma'am. It began with a glance. It ended with a slap. But between those two moments were decades of smaller wounds. A lifetime of being told, subtly or not, that dignity must be earned twice over if you look like me." From the gallery behind him, Danielle Monroe sat scribbling in a leather-bound journal. Her published piece in The Atlantic, "The Aisle Seat That Shook a System," had already begun to reframe the national dialogue. Now she was chronicling what came next. The next representative to speak was Theodore Jenkins, former airline executive turned congressman. "There's a fine line, Major," he said, tapping his pen, "between individual misconduct and blaming an entire industry." Isaiah's tone didn't change. "And there's a dangerous one between systemic negligence and polite indifference." That sentence echoed. Danielle underlined it twice. Back at the airline's downtown headquarters, high above Charlotte's skyline, the executive board sat watching in silence. Sylvia Morton, the VP of Corporate Ethics, folded her arms, her jaw clenched. "Damage control?" someone asked. Sylvia shook her head. "We're past that. It's reform or collapse." Meanwhile, Jasmine Cole had been placed on voluntary leave, an internal investigation, they called it. She was offered silence, severance, and a suggestion to take time. Instead, she went public. 2 days before the hearing, she had uploaded her own statement, a 7-minute video that began with her saying, "I was there, and what I saw broke my heart." It went viral within hours. In the hearing room, Representative Parrish looked over her glasses. "Major Freeman, in your experience, do you believe bias training is enough to prevent this from recurring?" Isaiah inhaled slowly. "Training is important, but transformation is essential. This isn't about teaching people to be nice. It's about requiring institutions to act with integrity." Clapping wasn't allowed in the hearing chamber, but outside, on the Capitol steps, a crowd had gathered. Veterans, activists, airline employees, everyday passengers who had once been ignored, humiliated, dismissed. They held signs. Some read, "Respect has no altitude limit." Others, "Dignity must board first." Charles Freeman stood at the back of the crowd, coat folded over his arm. He watched the screen streaming the hearing. His eyes didn't blink. Inside, the gavel fell again. "We will reconvene next week," Parrish announced. "In the meantime, a formal review of aviation discrimination protocols will begin under the working title, The Freeman Standards." The cameras zoomed in, zoomed. Isaiah's face remained still. But in his eyes, a current shifted. Not pride, resolve. After the hearing, as the room emptied and aides collected papers, Danielle approached him in the hallway. "You said what needed saying," she told him, "but the story's still unfinished." Isaiah nodded. "It's bigger than one airline." "It always is." She pressed something into his hand, a folded note. Inside were names: Black pilots, Latino crew members, Sikh travelers flagged repeatedly, disabled veterans removed for non-compliance, Dozens of voices waiting. "I'm writing the full series," Danielle said. "I want to use your name." He met her gaze. "Use it, but not for me. For everyone who's still unheard." The next morning, across the country, airline union leaders called emergency meetings. By evening, 3 executives at the carrier, where Holly had worked, submitted resignations. Jasmine was reinstated with full back pay and issued a public apology. But even as reforms began, something else was brewing. A coalition of lawmakers quietly requested an FAA audit of every major domestic carrier's disciplinary records. What they found would shape the next storm. Isaiah returned to his post in Washington. Quietly, without escort or ceremony. But this time, as he walked through security at Reagan National Airport, the TSA agent looked up, smiled gently, and said, "Thank you, sir, for all of it." Isaiah nodded once. The man's eyes glistened. Later that night, Isaiah sat alone at his kitchen table. The lights were dim. His mother's Bible lay open beside him, a bookmarked psalm resting where her hands used to turn. A news anchor's voice murmured from the TV. The Freeman Standards, if adopted, would represent the largest overhaul of aviation anti-discrimination policy since 1968. He turned the volume down. He'd done what was required. But the work wasn't done. Tomorrow, he would board another plane. But tonight, he allowed himself to breathe. And just as he leaned back, his phone rang. "Unknown number," he answered. "Major Freeman," a woman's voice said, calm and low. "You don't know me, but I'm a pilot, and I need to tell you what happened on Flight 611 from Phoenix. You're not alone, and they're not finished." Isaiah didn't speak. He just reached for a pen. The ink had barely touched the page when the voice on the line whispered, "They just grounded another plane, and this time, it wasn't for weather." It started with a rumor, a quiet memo circulated among internal teams at 3 major airlines, warning of a potential class action lawsuit. No names, no formal declaration, just a whisper. The Freeman pattern is real, and it's growing. By the time Isaiah Freeman walked into the Federal Aviation Administration's central briefing room in Washington, he had already received 15 first-hand accounts pilots removed from rotation for attitude, cabin crew reprimanded for defending passengers, ground staff written up after intervening in profiling incidents. The flight from Phoenix was just the beginning. The cascade had become a storm. The room wasn't large, but it felt like the center of something tectonic. A dozen senior officials from the Department of Transportation, the FAA, and the Department of Justice sat at the oval table, papers in hand, expressions tense. At the head sat Secretary Arlene Grant, a black woman with salt and pepper curls and a voice known for being calm when storms broke. "Major Freeman," she said as he took his seat. "We've reviewed the footage, the testimony, the audits. We believe this is no longer a personnel issue." Isaiah folded his hands. It never was. Beside him sat Danielle Monroe, now an independent ethics consultant with 3 airline boards requesting her guidance. Her journal had turned into a published exposé, and her reputation had shifted from reporter to reform architect. She remained quiet, but the glint in her eyes told Isaiah. This moment mattered. Secretary Grant tapped a folder. "There is support for federal standards mandating accountability protocols, real-time incident logging, and anonymous protections for whistleblowers across all carriers. We're calling it the Equity in Aviation Act." A murmur passed through the room. Isaiah didn't blink. "It's overdue." But not everyone at the table agreed. Tom Benton, the regional airline union representative, leaned forward. "We've got pilots nervous, crew quitting mid-flight, passengers filming every interaction. You want safety? This pressure's going to backfire." Danielle looked up. "It's not the pressure that's dangerous. It's the silence. People weren't afraid to speak before they were punished for it. Isaiah added, "And now they're speaking, because the alternative is no longer bearable." Across the country, change moved faster than headlines could capture. In Atlanta, an airline issued its first public apology for racial profiling mid-flight. In Los Angeles, 3 black flight attendants filed a joint report on being repeatedly excluded from international routes. In Chicago, an airport announced a new department, Passenger Civil Rights Ombudsman. But not all pushback was quiet. Holly Reeves, the former flight attendant, re-emerged on a conservative news program, framed in soft lighting and remorseful tones. "I made a mistake," she said, "but I wasn't trained to see differently." It was meant as an apology. It landed like an admission of a deeper rot. Later that evening, Jasmine Cole, now promoted to Director of In-Flight Culture and Inclusion, held a staff-wide town hall. She stood beneath a banner that read, "Every seat has a story." "We are not here to fix people," she told the room. "We are here to fix the systems that failed them." Her words made it into the evening news. But back in Washington, the battle wasn't over. The airline lobbyists had arrived. Suits, briefcases, smiles that never reached their eyes. They lined the halls outside the committee room, whispering to staffers, promising compliance in exchange for delay. Isaiah saw them as he left the meeting. One of them, a man with silver hair and a golden tie pin, stepped into his path. "You've done well for yourself," the man said. "Hero of the month. But industries don't bend for heroes. They wait them out." Isaiah held his gaze. "Then they haven't met the right ones yet." He walked past without another word. 3 days later, on a bright spring morning, Secretary Grant stood beside Isaiah and Danielle as she signed the preliminary directive into law. For the first time, airlines would be federally required to submit quarterly data on discrimination complaints and disciplinary outcomes with oversight from an independent board. It wasn't a finish line. It was a runway. Isaiah received a letter the same afternoon from a young flight attendant in training who had watched his testimony online. It ended with 6 simple words. "You made me stay. Thank you." That night, Isaiah stood alone at Reagan National Airport, looking out over the tarmac. A storm gathered over the horizon, dark clouds stretching across the Potomac like ink spilled on the sky. He could feel it in the wind, resistance, doubt, backlash, but he wasn't alone anymore. He turned from the glass, and as he walked toward Gate 23B, where his next inspection flight awaited, a familiar voice called out behind him. "Major Freeman." It was Jasmine. She held out a boarding pass. "Jump seat's open. Thought you might like to see what change looks like." From the air, he smiled. Took the pass. Boarded. And as the plane ascended into the clouds, a message blinked onto every passenger screen, replacing the safety video just before takeoff. "Dignity flies with us now." And Isaiah closed his eyes, not to rest, but to remember what justice sounds like when it finally gets clearance to take off. There are stories that unfold in seconds, and stories that take generations to be heard. This was one of the latter. It began, as many injustices do, in silence, in the unspoken assumptions stitched into uniforms, in glances that judged before words could defend, in the polite, practiced condescension of a system that insists its bias is merely policy. One man boarded a plane that day not looking for a fight, not seeking to prove a point. He carried nothing but a boarding pass and the quiet weight of a life lived navigating unseen boundaries. Major Isaiah Freeman didn't raise his voice. He didn't demand applause. He simply expected respect, and that expectation, in the wrong eyes, became a threat. The moment was brief, a slap, a surge of gasps, 1,000 camera flashes of outrage and disbelief. But what followed that was the real story. Because injustice often hopes to pass like turbulence, disruptive but temporary. Isaiah Freeman made sure it didn't. He turned insult into investigation, humiliation into hearing, injury into a movement. He did not scream, he stood. And in doing so, he revealed something deeper than misconduct. A culture trained to profile, a hierarchy designed to protect itself, and a silence that had been normalized for far too long. What makes this story powerful is not just the moment of confrontation, but the grace that followed it. The man who had every right to rage chose instead to speak with clarity and calm. He showed the world that dignity isn't about status, but about steadiness. That justice doesn't always roar, it walks steadily through halls of power, past those who scoff and those who squirm, until it reaches the microphone and says, "Enough." And around him, others rose too. Jasmine Cole, the flight attendant who stood between protocol and principle. Danielle Monroe, the journalist who saw that the story wasn't just about one man, but an entire industry. Secretary Arlene Grant, who carried the weight of policy with the wisdom of lived experience. Each of them chose courage over convenience. Each made a choice that turned a headline into a turning point. The airline didn't crumble, but it changed. And in that change, hundreds of others saw possibility. Passenger rights were no longer a matter of customer service. They became a measure of moral compass. Protocols were rewritten, training manuals revised. Faces at the gate began to reflect the passengers they served. Not perfectly, not everywhere. But the wind had shifted. Isaiah Freeman became a symbol not of victimhood, but of resolve. He was never asking for special treatment, only equal footing, only to walk down an aisle without suspicion trailing him, only to be seen clearly and fairly. And by the end, he was. This story reminds us that the most dangerous prejudice is not the kind that shouts, it's the kind that smiles while tightening its grip. It's the policy that excuses bias, the procedure that protects silence. But when someone dares to name it, challenge it, and stand upright in its face, even the most entrenched systems must reckon with themselves. There will always be turbulence on planes, in boardrooms, in everyday life. But justice, like a well-built aircraft, is not shaken by every storm. It holds steady because people like Isaiah refuse to let go of the controls. And perhaps most powerfully of all, this wasn't a story of vengeance. Isaiah never needed someone to be ruined. He needed the truth to rise. And in that rise, so many others saw themselves. Veterans who had been overlooked, passengers who had been profiled, workers who had been afraid to speak. For each of them, the story said, "You are not alone." And to the ones who had enabled the silence, this story became a mirror, one they could no longer look away from. By its end, new standards were drafted, laws introduced, a message broadcast on every screen before takeoff. Dignity flies with us now. That message wasn't just for show. It was the result of one man's quiet insistence that dignity isn't negotiable. The final lesson? That systems can only hide behind policy for so long. Eventually, someone asks the right question. Someone tells the truth on the record. Someone grounds the plane, not with force, but with principle. Isaiah Freeman didn't ask to be a hero. But in choosing patience over fury, truth over silence, and integrity over ease, he became exactly what this country needed. A reminder that justice is not abstract. It's human. It has a face, a voice, and a spine. And that philosophy remains. Dignity does not request permission. It stands, it speaks, and it stays seated in the truth even when told to move. If this story moved you, leave a comment with the number 1. And if you believe justice must never fly standby again, subscribe to our channel and be here for the next story.